tighten those goggles because you're about to dive into the card pool. I'm your host, Stu Galetta,
And I'm Kyle Robertson.
and today we are talking about the top 10 money cards from Return to Ravnica.
This is part 2 of our 2-part set review. You can see part 1 where we discuss our hidden gems of Return to Ravnica as well. But without further ado, let's get on with this review.
Beginning our top 10 are the Shocklands. Now these range in price from $12 to $7, and the great thing about these cards is that they pretty much come into the battlefield tap, but you can prevent that if you pay 2 extra life. And the also added clause that these things have 2 basic land types also gives them value because they're searchable with a lot of the variety of fetch lands, and they can also meet a lot of different requirements. And most noted, they're really easy to help you fix your mana. And plus, if you don't need the mana and you're kind of low on life, you can let them come into play tapped and let them be played as a regular dual land.
You pretty much said it, Stu. The Shocklands, they're so named because paying 2 life is a bit like shocking yourself, a reference to the old burn spell. But paying 2 life to come into play untapped is just such a good deal, especially when you're playing in a game with more than 20 life, such as us Commander players like to do normally. They're pretty much regarded as the pinnacle of dual lands, except for maybe the original ones that were made way back in the day that didn't cost anything. But yes, especially the fact that they have the basic land types makes them searchable with fetch lands. These are played heavily in Modern and pretty much every format you care to imagine. They actually came down quite a bit in price after the Return to Ravnica block, because this was only the first time that they had been reprinted after they initially came along in the first Ravnica set. And while there's not really any rhyme or reason as to which 5 got printed in this set, Return to Ravnica, the other 5 got printed in Gatecrash. So if you're looking at these and thinking, where are the other color combinations? They're in the next set. Coming in at number 2 on our list, moving on from the Shocklands, we have for $10 an enchantment that's white called Rest in Peace. Now, as I said, this is an enchantment. It costs 2 to play, 1 and a white. And when Rest in Peace enters the battlefield, exile all cards from all graveyards. Also, if a card or a token would be put into a graveyard from anywhere, exile it instead. Again, like the Shocklands, the reason this card commands the price tag it does is because it is heavily played in pretty much every conceivable format, especially in Modern and other similar type formats where it becomes a huge hoser and hate card for graveyard strategies, especially Dredge, which is very, very powerful. And another notable thing about Rest in Peace is not only does it enter the battlefield and exile everyone's graveyards, but it continues to do so if any card or token would be put into a graveyard. And you might think, wait a minute, why does it matter if tokens don't die? But another neat thing about Rest in Peace is that due to its ability, Die's triggers are shut off. Much like Kalida's Trader of Get, another card that I would compare to this one in a lot of ways. If things get exiled instead of being put into the graveyard, they don't technically die. So things like Blood Artist and Falconwrath Noble, for example, where it says, oh, if a creature dies, somebody loses life and somebody gains life. Not so, as long as Rest in Peace is in play.
You said it all, Kyle, so there's nothing else to do except go on to our next one. So going at number 3, we see a huge staple in Commander. It's called Chromatic Lantern. It costs $9, and for that lovely price, you can pay 3 mana and bring this guy into play. Now, what it has is the ability to make it so that your lands can now tap and produce 1 color of any mana into your mana pool. It too also has the effect of tapping to produce 1 color of any mana, which is phenomenal. And this is why you see people using like Darksteel Ingot or Commander Sphere, because by using this kind of 3-drop to boost your mana is really big, but also to color fix everything, it's phenomenal. And other decks that you would typically see this in are like stuff that's using Prismatic Omen. But the great thing about this is this doesn't lock it down to 1 single color, since it is colorless. Any deck can use this, and any deck that can use this will use this.
I would pretty much put this card in almost any Commander deck that was running 3 or more colors regardless. Also, I have seen people play 2 colors and play this card just for the insane amount of fixing that it creates. As long as this thing is in play, you really don't have to worry about what color mana you're spending or what color your lands tap for or anything. And as we've kind of covered with other similar cards like Fifth Dawn's Joiner Adept, this gives lands that don't have the ability to tap for mana the ability to tap for mana. That alone wouldn't be enough to put it over the top, even the fact that it was an artifact, but the fact that it also, for itself, taps to add one more mana to your mana pool, that really makes it quite a competition between whether this or Darksteel Ingot or Commander's Sphere, the triple 3 mana rocks, are the best one. I suppose it depends on what deck you really want them for, but overall, I'd say Chromatic Lantern has gotta be the best one. But going from maybe a slightly understated power with that Chromatic Lantern to a very, very obvious power card, for number 4 on our money cards of Return to Ravnica, coming in at $7, we have Supreme Verdict. This is a multicolored card, specifically blue and white. It costs 4 to play, 1, 2 white, and 1 blue. It is a sorcery, and it's very simple. Supreme Verdict can't be countered, and it says, destroy all creatures. The pretty much automatic comparison that this is going to draw is to Wrath of God. Wrath of God is one of the only 4-mana board wipe spells ever created. There are a small handful of them, but people in development over at Wizards figured out pretty quickly that being able to wipe the entire board for 4 mana was just way too good of a deal. And since then, you've seen a lot of these kind of board wipe cards moved up to 5 mana. Supreme Verdict was one of the last ones that actually was printed at 4 mana. It's in 2 colors, white and blue, that really, really like to do this kind of thing and like having access to this. But the best part is, it can't be countered. One of the greatest things you could do in response to a board wipe traditionally is counter the thing, because it leaves the player who casts it out a bunch of mana, and they didn't get to do whatever they wanted to do. With Supreme Verdict, you don't even have that option, and that, put very, very simply, is why this is pretty much the sweeper of choice in every conceivable format.
Being able to wipe the board when you want is very powerful. Being able to know that it will go off without a hitch is even more so. So even in a commander format where we have one of every card, like you may have a couple board wipes in your hand, I typically will save Supreme Verdict in the event knowing that I will need it down the line where more counters can be available, there's more mana available, more shenanigans to go on. Phenomenal card. If you're running those colors, it's a staple. Hands down, a staple. Now moving away from a dual colored card to a monocolored card, at number 5 for $5 we have Cyclonic Rift. It is a 2-drop instant, a colorless and a blue, and it reads, return target non-land permanent you don't control to its owner's hand. And it also has the added clause of overload for 7, 6 colorless and a blue. And that means you may cast this spell for its overload cost. If you do, change the text by replacing all instances of target with each. So what that boils down to is saying for 7 mana rather than 2, you can now make it so that everything you don't control goes back to its owner's hand. Now, this is really powerful, and I guarantee if you played Commander, you've definitely had this card played against you before. It's almost a board wipe in the fact that it clears the board, but it's kind of like one-sided, like in Garrick's Wake is, where it's happening to everyone else but you. It gets rid of artifacts, enchantments, planeswalkers, and the creatures as well. So being able to return everything, giving it a hard reset, is really, really key.
Well, looking at this card on the face of it, it's still a pretty serviceable removal spell, even if you don't get to the overload. For 2 mana, bouncing any non-land permanent to its owner's hand, not a bad deal, but as you said, Stu, the overload for 7 mana is where this card really gets put over the top. In a multiplayer game where there's 4 players and somebody plays a Cyclonic Rift, it's one of those cards that sends a groan of despair around the entire table, and this card is just absolutely backbreaking. Because as you said, it bounces everything, so not only are they going to have to recast their creatures that get bounced back to their hand, they're also going to have to recast every single mana rock they've played that game, every single little enchantment that is helping them out. Planeswalkers even get reset back to wherever they were. This card is just ridiculous in the power it provides. Blue really, really, really needed a sweeper this powerful, and in fact it's so powerful that I've heard a lot of players calling for it to be banned from Commander, like a lot of other power cards have been. I don't really agree with that, mostly because I love playing Cyclonic Rift on people. If it did happen, I guess I wouldn't be all that surprised. Moving on to number 6 on our list for, conveniently, $6, we have a creature this time, and it is a pretty cool one at that. It's called Judevara Hellkite, and it is a dragon, an 8 mana dragon, and it costs 6 and double red to play. It's a 6/6 with flying, and its ability is, whenever a dragon you control attacks, put a 6/6 red dragon creature token with flying onto the battlefield. The reason this card has the price tag that it does is because dragons are a pretty popular creature type. You see a lot of dragons played in Commander especially, where people can play higher mana cost cards. This card is a staple in any deck with even a few dragons in it, just because of the immense power that it brings to the table. Even if it's just attacking by itself, remember, you can make a 6/6 every turn, and because those 6/6 tokens that it makes are also dragons and count toward its own ability, your amount of dragons can multiply exponentially just from attacking with this one card once. If you add a bunch of other dragons to the mix, this thing doesn't even have to attack when it hits the board for you to generate a crap ton of tokens. The amount of advantage that this thing puts on the board is just absolutely insane.
Definitely. And a card that this really brings to mind for me is it's very similar to Geist to Saint Traft, where every time you do an attack, you get a token. But this one doesn't have the added clause of saying that the token is exiled, where most cards that have this effect have it. Like you said, you don't have to attack necessarily with this guy, any dragon that attacks. So if you're using cards like Conspiracy or like Mirror Entity to make it so everything that you have is a dragon, you're going to have these enormous guys coming out and defending your field if for some reason your creatures don't have vigilance. It's like a great flying wall. And also, they aren't attacking when they come in. So this way, like, if they do something in which, like, Aether Spouts goes on, where it's like it returns all attacking creatures to their opponent's hand or deck, you're still safe. And it's something that I love this card for. It is a little expensive to cast, but it's a dragon. You gotta love it. Moving from one card that costs a lot of mana to one that costs a ridiculous amount of mana is at our number 7 slot for $5, World Spineworm. Now this one costs a whopping 11 mana of 8 colorless and 3 green. It's a worm that is 15/15. It has trample, if that isn't enough ridiculousness right there, but it also has the extra stuff of whenever it dies, you put 3 5/5 green worm creature tokens with trample onto the battlefield, and when this guy's put into the graveyard from anywhere, it gets shuffled back into its owner's library. I'm not even sure where to start with this guy. There's so much going on with him. It's so much flavor. And it's such an oppressive card, especially when it comes out. It's very similar to Wormcoil Engine, in which like it breaks off into like smaller pieces of itself, which is phenomenal because whenever this card dies, you get value from it, which is great. And it's almost as if the card didn't leave the field. But it also has the extra clause of trample. Trample. That means you can't chump block this thing. And it means they have to waste a lot of their army in order to make it so that they don't lose really, really quick. But also to note, the last thing on this thing about how when it is put into the graveyard, it goes back into its owner's library. The reason this kind of clause is on here is there's a lot of decks that abuse cards that are in the graveyard. So this has a clause to make it so it isn't as oppressible, but it's such a giant creature. There's tons of ways to cheat this thing out. Elvish Piper is an easy way for me to think of it. Or if you're running 5 colors, Fist of Suns, Quicksilver Amulet. So even though the huge cost is there, it's not impossible to have this card be played and be feared.
You pretty much covered the bases with this one, Stu. This appears in some fringe modern decks because mostly of that last ability, which allows you to shuffle it back into your deck if you need to get rid of it from your hand or something. That means it's a great finisher for later in the game. And then early in the game, if you don't need it or have to be forced to discard it or something, that's great. It'll just come back to you later on in the game. And as you said, the fact that if this thing dies, it kind of breaks up into smaller tokens that are still pretty menacing 5/5s with trample, that's pretty good. You really can't beat card advantage like that, and therefore the only real way of dealing with this thing is exiling it with something like Path to Exile, for example.
Sliding into number 8 on our list, for the lovely price of $4.50, we have Deathright Shaman. And it's a hybrid mana, meaning that it either costs 1 green or 1 black. So this is another Golgari card as well. Now this thing has 3 tap abilities. So the first one being for no mana cost, you can just tap it, exile target land card from a graveyard, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. So this is really good for just hitting troublesome lands, or if they're using mill, or if you're milling out an opponent. It's a really good way to say, hey, you lost this is gone for good, and it nets you something, which is really, really valuable. The second one being for if you pay 1 black and tap it, you exile target instant or sorcery card from a graveyard, and then each opponent loses 2 life. So this is a great way to stop Izzet decks or any kind of storm decks that like to recur things, like with Past in Flames or any of the other cards that have flashback, for example. So this way you can make it so it's gone and gone for good, and it hurts them even more. The final one, if you pay a green and tap it, you exile target creature card from a graveyard. And this one has the opposite effect in which you gain 2 life. If they have something that is easily recurable, or something that's just, alright, this is a combo piece, I want to make sure this is definitely gone forever, pay 1 green, tap it, and you're good. But also, this is a 1/2 for 1 mana, so it's already better than the vanilla test. It has 3 modes for any point in the game, and this isn't a card that just sits around and is useless in your hand or on the field. Its versatility is vast, so it's a phenomenal card for the fact that it's low-costed, great stats, modal, and pretty much good at any point in the game.
Well, Stu, I wouldn't go so far as to call this card fun, because it's not if you're playing against it. Let me just say that. Fun fact, this actually used to be the most expensive card from Return to Ravnica, even more expensive than the Shocklands. At the peak of this card's popularity, I think it was about 20 bucks a copy. It was a staple in Modern for as long as it existed in Modern. It has since been banned, and that is for very, very good reasons. One, because think about this thing for a minute. It's a very, very relevant creature type in that it's an elf. It's a 1/2, as you said, very good stats for a 1-drop. Could go into any black deck, any green deck, or any hybrid thereof. And it's better than a Birds of Paradise in a format like Modern, because not only can it tap to make you any color of mana, but it exiles a land from someone else's graveyard by doing it. What do people in Modern love playing? Their fetch lands. So this card was pretty much always a way to ensure your opponents didn't do any shenanigans with the lands in their graveyards, and also gave you free mana all the time. As you said, the other effects are not quite as relevant, but still can be important over the course of the game. And the pure versatility that this card offers is really hard to beat. So Deathright Shaman, unfortunately, has fallen quite a ways in price since its peak of popularity in Modern, but it was banned, it needed to be banned, it deserved to be banned, and it's still the bane of casual players everywhere.
Something to note for why it could be, I don't know, not as bad in the sunlight, is it doesn't target artifacts. So, I mean, it does have something that it is niche against. So if you are running a very artifact-heavy deck, you're safe from Deathright Shaman in that regard, as long as it isn't a creature. But also enchantments also don't get hit by this too. And those are 2 very big types of cards that are relevant both in the grave and on the field. So the fact that it hits a lot of other things is still really good, but again, it's not a Hail Mary for the best card for this kind of style, by all means.
Coming in at number 9 on our list, we have a $4 Golgari instant called Abrupt Decay. This is another multicolored card. It's a 2-mana instant in the Golgari colors, 1 black and 1 green. Abrupt Decay can't be countered by spells or abilities, and you can destroy target non-land permanent with converted mana cost 3 or less. As you may have noticed, there's kind of a little cycle in Return to Ravnica of these uncounterable multicolored cards. Counterflux was one of them, Supreme Verdict was one of them, and now Abrupt Decay is one of them too. And I have to say, the Return to Ravnica block really killed it in terms of spot removal, because some of the best spot removal ever printed came out of this set. Like Abrupt Decay, for example, this card is a Modern staple. I've seen a few people play it in Commander, too. Not only is it an uncounterable instant speed removal card, but it can destroy anything, non-land permanent. That means, again, planeswalkers, artifacts, enchantments, and even creatures, as long as they cost 3 or less. Now, that may seem like a bit of a limit, but I don't have to tell you, I'm sure, that formats like Modern, for example, have very fast clocks and usually very low curve things. So this destroys pretty much anything of relevance, and it can't even be countered by abilities, much less spells. So this card is more or less totally unstoppable, can demolish whatever threat absolutely needs to be there at the moment, all for the low, low cost of 2 mana. I have to say, once again, this proves Golgari really got the best cards in Return to Ravnica. And Abrupt Decay, while it may not be as good in longer game formats like Commander, it's still a pretty serviceable removal spell.
You nailed it, Kyle. Everything I was going to say about it, you literally took right out of my mouth, so that's perfect. And if you guys still have more questions about this card, let us know.
We're kind of wrapping up our list here and going to number 10 to round out the money cards of Return to Ravnica. We have one that kind of makes me scratch my head, not because it's not a good card. It is, but why is this one making it to the money cards? But anyway, let's talk about it. Coming in at number 10 on our list for $3.50 or thereabouts, we have a legend, actually. The only one on our list, Tristani, Selesnya's Voice. As you might have guessed, she is a Selesnya card. She costs 4 to play, 2 green and 2 white. She's a 2/5. Pretty solid defensive stats, really, and she is a Dryad legendary creature. Not that that creature type really matters all that much. But has 2 abilities. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you gain life equal to that creature's toughness. She also has the ability to tap 3, 1 colorless, a green, and a white, and tap her to populate, which, if you don't know what populate is, you basically put a token into play that's a copy of a different creature token you control. As I said, this card is the Selesnya commander from Return to Ravnica, essentially, the head of the Selesnya guild in this time period, and has 2 very relevant abilities. The populating is just a super cool ability to play with creature tokens because it doesn't just pump out 1/1s. Let's say you somehow made an 8/8 token, hint hint, Grove of the Guardian. This thing can copy it and do so pretty much endlessly for just 3 mana and a tap ability, which is easily circumvented. There are so many ways to untap this thing and do it all over again. Another advantage, though, is whenever you create more big tokens, or even small tokens, or even play a creature that's not a token, you gain life equal to that creature's toughness, which is certainly nothing to sneeze at either, continuous life gain. And all of that wrapped up in a nice defensive body like this, it's no wonder that a lot of people like making Tristani their commander.
Definitely. It's green-white tokens at its core, and the thing I really do love about this card is how it has such high defense, because it gives it the wall appearance, meaning that your opponents aren't going to attack because they know the damage isn't going to go through. And since it has an instant speed tap effect to populate, it makes it so, alright, I'm not attacking, I'm going to go to my end step. You're now able to take advantage of that, saying, alright, before you end, let me go create a token before my turn kicks back up into play. So you can be aggressive, you can play the right way, you can grow your army, and you can eventually start making so your opponent's field feels really, really small, and you can just swing in for big, stupid damage.
But as I said, Stu, I am kind of left scratching my head over why this makes the list of money cards. Certainly, there are other cards in Return to Ravnica, hint hint, my favorite card, Vraska the Unseen, that I would have thought should beat this out for a spot on the money cards list. I wasn't really under the impression that this card was all that popular, except in terms of Commander.
Well, if you think about it, Vraska was reprinted in a dual deck. Tristani hasn't. Our only copy is still here in Ravnica. So, I mean, if you're looking at that case, if we see Tristani get put into some sort of dual deck or, reprinted in some sort of commander block, this would probably drop in price. So that is wrapping up Return to Ravnica for us. Now, we've seen the money cards and we've seen the hidden gems. You guys have heard our reasons of why we love certain cards and how great they are in certain decks. So now it comes down to our rating portion of the show. And for those of you unfamiliar with it, we go on a rating scale of bronze, silver, gold, and the ever-loved platinum. So Kyle, you start us off here. Where does this fall on your line?
Well, for me, Stu, I have to give Return to Ravnica a pretty solid gold rating. And the reason for that is twofold. One, because Return to Ravnica was probably my favorite Magic block ever, right in front of the original Ravnica, because it's Ravnica. I love the idea of the guilds. I love the 2 color pairs that they really nailed the flavor on, especially the second time around. And what can I say? Legendary creatures are what I'm all about. The Ravnica blocks gave us many different legendary creatures to talk about, including ones we've seen, Tristani, for example, and ones we maybe haven't, like Rakdos and Melek and Isperia. That said, though, this set also gives us a lot of power cards that are still great in Commander, but are modern staples as well. Modern loves cards like Rest in Peace and Abrupt Decay and Supreme Verdict. Casual players love Chromatic Lantern and Cyclonic Rift, and everybody pretty much loves a card like Deathright Shaman or Vraska the Unseen, provided you can play them in the right decks. There are just so many quality cards in here, and that's not even getting into the shock lands, which everybody loved the fact that they were reprinted in this set. Overall, not quite a platinum rating because I don't think it changed the game overall, which is kind of my qualifications for a platinum, but just provided a really great, solid group of cards for us to play with. Very fun, very stylish, very powerful, and so overall, I give Return to Ravnica a gold, definitely.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to ride your bandwagon here, Kyle. Gold is definitely where I'm going to rate this. Now, it came just shy for me of giving it the platinum rating. There are a lot of staples in this set, as you see with Cyclonic Rift, but also it branches out more than that. Like, there are tons of overload cards that you see in other decks. Now, they aren't exactly the best things to always play, but they're always there, and I love them for that. And another thing that kind of made me go higher than a silver for this is because usually most sets where the lands are the #1 feature, the rest of the cards kind of fall short. And I don't feel like this had that. Like, there's a huge spice in this. And in the hidden gems, like, that land, Rogue's Passage, is still one of my #1 used cards today. And the fact that that's just on an uncommon land gives you a real idea of, like, what kind of hidden potential's in here. So, not high enough to be a platinum, but definitely not low enough to be silver. Gold is 100% Return to Ravnica. So it turns out that is our pool time for today, and if the water felt just right, be sure to check our first segment in which we talk about the top 10 hidden gems that we found in Return to Ravnica.
Now, if you didn't like the toys we played with today, let us know about some of your favorites. You can comment down below this video, or you can hit us up on Twitter at MTGTheCardPool, and of course you can always email us as well at mtgthecardpool@gmail.com. I'm Kyle Robertson.
And I'm Stu Galetta, and we'll see you next time at the Card Pool.